you will remember me from our past sessions as well as the last conference. My name is Melinda Cooper. I am one of the co-organizers and a project manager who supports the operations of this network. I am excited to have with us today a fantastic group of individuals who participated in a discussion around radical self-care. We are recording today, as you may have just seen. We'll ask that you please turn off your video and your sound unless you're speaking, in which case it's fine to turn those on. Let's see here. Oh, go back. For our agenda, it's very general and should be easy to stick to. We're going to do a summary of the panel conversation in case you missed it or weren't able to see the whole thing. And then that'll be followed by mostly question and answer discussions with a closing. The agreements that we try to stick to during these meetings, and please feel free to add your own in the group chat. Just send it to everyone so we can see your suggestions. We will share airtime, being brief and specific. We will listen for understanding, critique ideas, not people. Whatever happens in the Zoom, it stays in the Zoom, just like Vegas. And of course, last but not least, explore unconventional approaches as these new conditions demand new solutions. Our conversation was hosted by Praycious Wilson-Gay, from the Public Theater's mobile unit. She is also a co-organizer of this network, and you could find this on YouTube if you haven't seen it yet. We'll be making this presentation available as a PDF to the network afterwards, and all of these links will be embedded. All right, I am going to I'm going to pass it over to Praycious and let her take it away with the introductions. Praycious.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. Can I get like thumbs up if you all can hear me? I just want to check in. Great. Yeah, so my name is Praycious Wilson-Gay. As Melinda stated before, I work at the mobile unit in the Public Theater. And specifically, I am helping to launch a program in a correctional facility in New York City. That is theater focused, and we've had many pivots due to COVID, but that is ultimately what I do at the Public Theater. I was blessed to be able to and moderate a conversation with four great, amazing individuals who have done work in our fields. Specifically, the conversation was around self-care and what that looks like for those who do the work in this field. And I found it important, as I said in the conversation beforehand, I found it very important to have this conversation because during this period of time where I was going through trainings and seminars and workshops on, how to do intentional work in certain communities, I also was very keen in trying to understand how I was going to take care of myself during that time as well, or how my teaching artists who I'm hiring who have never worked in a correctional facility but have done this work in similar circles were going to take care of themselves. How did we as an institution support them going into another institution? So I found it very important to have this conversation, and I believe that the panelists for this conversation were perfect. We had Suraya Keating from Marin Shakespeare Company. We had Dawn Stern and Stephan Wolfert from DE-CRUIT, and Nia Wilson, who is from SpiritHouse Inc. Next slide. Thank you. So just to recap some of the conversation that we had, just in case you didn't get a chance to watch it before coming on this, we talked specifically of ourselves first before we can help others, and even that act in itself is radical self-care. And how important that is. We talked about anchoring and using anchoring and grounding practices as a crucial part of the work because not everyone is afforded the same opportunities to actively self-care in maybe the way that you think. And so what's really important is to give grounding and anchoring activities that anyone can do anywhere and in any circumstance. Another great point that came out of that conversation is that safe space does not always exist. I know that we love the word safe space as like a a bling word, if that makes sense. There's an official term for that, but I can't remember right now. But we love to grasp onto that word. It's like safe space. Everything we create is safe space. It's safe, 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 safe. But the truth of the matter is that like safe space is not, although your safe space may be safe to you, that doesn't mean that it's somebody else's safe space. So you should work on creating a safe space, but you should always strive to secure the space. And that specifically came out talking to Don and Stephan around working with veterans and what their communities deal with, and how safe is, nowhere is safe, but you can strive to secure the space with the group. And the last point was more so around the pandemic and how it does offer an opportunity for us to understand that the way that we have been working, the cycle that we have created, does not serve us as people, as humans. So yeah, those were some of the big takeaways from that conversation. So I want to begin this Q&A by asking a question to our panelists, and then asking the same question to those that are attending around self-care. And what practices, and resources do you give those to, that you give to your participants that are ultimately rooted in the values and privileges that you have embodied? And just to give an example, yoga is not self-care to everyone. Meditation is not self-care to everyone. And I think that comes from, and I say that to say that when we're thinking about self-care activities as people, we usually think about what we do for ourselves first. And I am able to say, yoga brings me peace, but I also realize that after my yoga session, I'm able to make a smoothie and, take more than just the yoga session. I'm not doing the yoga session and having to go back to myself and potentially go into, whatever situation that is in. Like, I can create my self-care and create a breath of what that self-care practice is for me. And then a part of me is like, I don't understand why you don't think yoga's great. Like, it's yoga. But the fact of the matter is that it's not going to have the same impact on somebody else. And I recognize that me having that stance around yoga, even though I don't necessarily feel that way, is really rooted in my privilege and how I'm able to show up in the world as a free Black woman in the United States of America. And so I want to pose that question to our panelists and see how they feel about that. I would love to start with Nia Wilson from SpiritHouse.
I was so looking forward to hear what other folks had to say. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be back here with you all. The panel was wonderful, and I'm excited to continue talking. So self-care rooted in privilege. It's something that I had to really learn after years and years and years and years of doing this work with people, that there are things that are a privilege that I have that other folks don't have, and I just didn't recognize it. One example that I give all the time, which may not be necessarily connected to our populations, is that my parents were married for over 60 years. And I grew up with all of my siblings for over 60 years. And there are 8 of us. There's a lot of us. And my nieces and nephews, that's a huge privilege that I've had, to be in a stable family. And when working with other people, my assumptions around what family looks like and means for people is rooted in what I had. And so have had to learn, even with my own children whose fathers are not in their lives, I've had to learn that everyone doesn't have that. Everyone doesn't have the same vantage point. And therefore, I can't walk into the room with that assumption and assume that people can move the way that they're moving from that vantage point. So we have an exercise, which I'll probably talk about a little later, that we do that helps us to understand, like, what is our vantage point? And it doesn't mean that I deny who I am or where I came from. It means that I actually walk in knowing who I am and understanding that everyone in the room doesn't have the same vantage point. And the first thing to do is for people to understand who they are, what their vantage point is, so that then we can have a conversation that's actually rooted in who we each are and what we each bring into the room.
Suraya, would you like to go next?
Sure, Precious, thank you. Yeah, it's a great question around values and privilege. And I feel like it's really important for me to be aware of what my values are when I'm walking into a space, as well as my privilege, and not trying to make them go away, because they're part of me. It's important, but at the same time, create a lot of spaciousness to really get to know who I'm working with and what their values are. And, you know, I'm also aware of I grew up in a white middle-class family just outside New York. My family was pretty broken, a lot of mental illness. But what it did is the suffering in my childhood really pushed me into getting interested in emotional intelligence and psychology and the arts, because that was the only way I knew to express myself. And being a white woman, I had a lot more privilege and advantage to get into the kind of programs that would serve me and do the kind of inner work that has helped me to grow and heal in my life. And so I'm very aware that, you know, the kind of emotional that I have valued is not what a lot of, you know, people of color and white people too who are incarcerated are able to focus on when they're in survival mode. So you know, just an awareness of the emotional kind of work that I've been lucky to do, really, you know, really getting that has been a privilege in itself, has been really important in terms of then bringing it to, you know, particularly in the prison populations that I work with.
Don and Stephan, if you choose.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having us. I'm going to speak to this in part just because I was patient zero for DE-CRUIT, and I epitomize everything that represents privilege in terms of demographics in this country. So in the 90s, when it was developing DE-CRUIT, the idea was built on the premise that we were wired for war in the military, but after the service, we weren't unwired from war. We weren't rewired for society. So DE-CRUIT was originally designed to unwire from war, not realizing at the time of its creation that all of this other stuff is wiring as well. The embracing of white supremacy, even if it's unconscious, and all of this, racism, sexism, all of the tenets are a form of wiring. They're learned. So we thought, obviously, that has to be incorporated as well from the very beginning. So our original idea was, excuse me, modeled after Chris Johnson's Question Bridge. If you've ever seen it, it's quite brilliant, his installation. Question Bridge, colon, and then in his case, he did a black male. And so he gave, with talking to him and getting his approval, our plan was DE-CRUIT, colon, and then whatever population we're working with the idea being that all we're doing is bringing what is the function of your brain and body. This is what's happening. When you go into that fight or flight response or whatever is the behavior you're looking to rewire, if we know that foundation and how to reset that, then we can begin rewiring it. And that way, the population itself that we're working with helps to reform or rather inform us as to what we need, how we can help that group. The best example I can give, I think the most recent was working with women veterans. I think we mentioned this in the taping as well, but you know, I was teaching the women veterans only so that I could leave, so they could take it over. And in the very first class is when I discovered one of my major assumptions that I continued to do, which is that women, at least from the women we've been working with, do not feel a sense of camaraderie in the military, not even from other women. It's a white man's world. They're in it, and when they excel, they're punished for it. So when they're leaving, there's for them. So it was about how do I get out of the way, provide the basic science and components that can help reset for rewiring, but then turn it over to whatever group is looking to use our tenants. Anything you want to add?
No, I was just saying, so the major assumption was, military unit camaraderie. Everybody's got camaraderie. So what we learned to do very quickly, because veterans are great truth tellers when they need to be, is to actually ask the population. We knew our values were camaraderie. We knew our values were connection, caring, and then we were patient zeros, but not doctors, not any not any fancy letters after our name. So we knew we had to listen. We had to actually listen to the population we were serving and let them guide us and what they needed. And then and that's so our practices then came out for them. And then of course you notice what's the same for all of the populations. And for us, our biggest tool was breath. We're trained actors, classically trained actors. You must use your breath and voice. And what we noticed was the through line with all of those populations was really breath. And that became our biggest tool.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to check to see if we have any questions in the chat. Please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, whether that is from watching previously or if anything arises as we begin to have conversations. But I'm seeing that there is not. So I'm going to ask a question. I would love if we could spend a little bit of time with the group that is on this call to, if you all could lead us through an example of some of the self-care exercises that you all do in your programs. I know you kind of alluded to that earlier, Mama Nia, if you want me to go to you, but if not, I can go to someone else.
The practice that I was actually talking about is, it's called Where I'm From. And lots of people do this very similar thing. So it's not something that I would say that we, have ownership around. Folks find multiple ways of introducing themselves into groups. We do say that it is a practice. We do not use it as an icebreaker. Because what we understand and have discovered is that as you continue to do this, it is a living practice. You learn more and more and more about yourself than in the 10 or 15 minutes that we may take to do the exercise. And it helps us to understand who we are when we enter a space. And so when we do the Where I'm From practice, we ask people to identify who their people are. So who are your people? And it can be blood family, and it could be chosen family. We say your people are the people who claim you. So we always give the example of, like, you may think Beyonce is your people. She may not agree. You can't claim Beyonce if Beyonce doesn't claim you. So it helps people to really understand, like, who they're connected to. So who are your people? And then what place are you from? And so someone who was raised in Hawaii doesn't have the same experiences as someone who was raised in Alaska. So what is the place that you came up in? What does it look like? What does it smell like? Was it industrial? Was it country? Was it a town? Was it a big suburban? Was it a city? Was it urban? Was it suburban? So what is the place that you're from? And then when are you from? Like, what time period did you come up in? Like, what is the culture? What were you watching on TV? What is the music? What was the clothes? People who came up during, for instance, an Obama presidency, and someone who came up in Nixon presidency, and those are very different time periods. And so you get to really evaluate what was happening as you were coming up and how that has shaped you. Because it's really important. One of the things that we say, and then I'll pass it on, is that, we may enter a room and we get around a circle and people start listing off the letters behind their names, their job titles, and all of these things that can bring you accolades. But the truth of the matter is that who your people are, where you came up from, and when you came up from are always going to be a part of you. You're going to always enter a space with that. Those are often the way that your values are shaped. And so it is important that people understand how you have shaped the values that you have. And then you're able to then understand and begin to talk about things that may or may not need to change, both with you and also how it shapes the room that you're in.
I would love to just do a little example of that, my own self, so I can grasp on to what you were saying. So if I was to do a where I'm from, which I've done many of these, I would say I am from Ronald and Elmira Wilson, who are my grandparents. I am from Margie Wilson, who is my mother. I am from SpiritHouse, who is my tribe. I am from Black girls getting their hair braided over the kitchen sink and washed. I am from I Can't Breathe. I am from Black Lives Matter. I am from George Bush to Obama. I am from old down south, Nuck If You Buck classics. And so that's my people, where I'm located. Oh, and I'm from North Carolina. I'm from North Kakalaki. I'm from KKK down the street. I'm from farming land. I am from slaves, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really thinking deeply about all of the ways in which I'm connected. And I also will say that doing that practice really helped me personally help my purpose. And I think that's something that you alluded to in our original panel, was that when you're breathing, you should be breathing in and out purpose. And I know doing where I'm from and building on that, and that was just off the top of my head, but I know it's horrible, but building on that has really helped me root myself and what I am supposed to be doing and what I plan to do. We do have a question. Is it okay if I jump to the question? Yeah. Yes? Mama Nia, were you going to say something?
I was just looking at the question.
Okay. I'm going to read it out loud. And is it okay if I jump to that and then we can go back to practices for the panelists? Is that cool? Cool. So our question, and this is for anyone, this is specifically for SpiritHouse. Does the where I am from exercise leave open space for others to make stereotypical assumptions about people they may not know, like gender, age, region, often provoke people to make judgments?
That has not been our experience. It has not been our experience at all. Actually, the where I'm from exercise often brings people to tears. And because it's so introspective, because you really are thinking about what has shaped you. We have never had an experience where it has, and we've been doing this exercise for more than 10 years, where people use that to judge other people in the room. People find it fulfilling to be able to shed the labels that they actually thought were important. So when someone who has a PhD and we say, no, who's your mama? Who's your grandmama? Who are the people that the people appreciate being able to have an opportunity to expand in a way that we don't normally give people that opportunity. So I'm from Ronald, Elmira, and Josephine. I'm from Crab Cakes and Campbell's Pork and Beans. I'm from Saltwater Air and Saltwater Air and Concrete Stairs. And I'm from Stevie Wonder, the Jackson 5, the Brady Bunch. So y'all know when I grew up, you know, I grew up near the water and you know who my people are. People actually really appreciate being able to do that. That's an interesting question, though. I have to say that.
There's another question at Mama Nia. When you use it, how's it structured? Outlaid one at a time for a blank amount of minutes, or in pairs, or in writing?
It depends on the size of the room. So, you know, you always have to be mindful of your time. So you have to know who your audience is. It depends on the size of the room. If we've got 50 people in a room and everybody got a minute, that would take up almost an hour. So what's most important is that people get to write the exercise, and depending on who's in the room, they can share it with each other, and then you get to, you know, give feedback about how it felt. Because most important is how it felt. Not necessarily that we hear from everybody, right? What's most important is what it brings up and what it brings out.
Yeah, as someone who's also done this particular exercise and helped facilitate it in a smaller group, what I will say is that this also creates a level of ownership around your words. And I know for me, when I write my words, I feel more inclined to share my words and read aloud what I had to say about myself than read a passage from a play or like, because those are my words coming from my body. I'm willing to be like, I'm from Nuck if you buck the South, you know, like I'm willing to add more emotion to it and really dive into it deeper because it is mine. And it can't be taken away from me because it's who I am. Would Don and Stephan like to go ahead and jump in with some practices that you all do?
Yeah, sure. The circle is really important to our structure because as you were talking about, one of the first things we do is create the container and make sure that everybody knows they're responsible for part of the container, holding the space. That's the security. That's what makes, because our population, you know, let us know right away, there's no such thing as a safe space. When an IED could go off behind you or from a Dorito bag, there's no, it doesn't, and you know, they let us know right away. They hated that expression. So we said, okay, well, what is better for you? And they said, well, we're used to securing the area. We know how to have each other's back. And that's how the container became a circle where there's not you're broken or damaged and I'm the healer or the one who, it's none of that. There's none of that model. We're all in a circle. And then we start with the ritual, and the ritual came from my name is Caius Marcius. And the importance of your name and what's in that name. A very simple statement, but we're asking people, the part of the check-in ritual is to take in breath, to say your name, and to say how you feel and where in your body does that feeling lie. So my check-in is, I'm Dawn Stern, and I feel butterflies in my stomach, and that my heart center is pulling forward towards the screen. And then you're going to pass with an appropriate physical gesture. And so they pass.
Sometimes contact.
And we work them up to contact, but usually doesn't start with contact. So then they pass to the next person. Super simple check-in. Cannot believe how much information we get. How is a person breathing? How are they saying their name? Do they say their full name? Do they say one? Do they say a nickname? How are they able to express anything that's happening? Because they say, you know, we get a lot of, you know, I feel fine. Great. And where does fine live in your body? Where is fine? Where do you feel fine in your, so you, just that, and then the container is capped with a reinforcement, which is same thing, a breath in, not thinking about what you're going to say while someone else is speaking, but a breath in when it's passed to you, breathing in, and I reinforce. And one thing that that's going to stay with you from the experience through the week until we meet next time. And everybody is so for me, I reinforce community, I reinforce breath and pass to the next person. So that container really holds the work that we do, and that ritual is really important to not send, at the time we were doing this, a lot of the work, it was in New York City, to not send the veterans out, after what was experienced in the circle, to not send them out without their coping mechanisms that they need to survive. So that's how we.
I see that Nia wrote the work to reconnect and stay connected to the body is so important. And right. Yeah, I love that modern science is proving what our ancient selves already knew. But yeah, right. But Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, this is part of that, what Dawn perfectly stated. But I just wanted to expand on I realize that using Shakespeare, the great colonizer, is problematic. One of the many reasons we use him is because of his rhythm, the natural human heartbeat and the natural human breath to heartbeat rhythm, which is, my name is Caius Marcius, who hath done all the Volsces great harm and mischief. So if one of Shakespeare's veterans can go to the enemy after he's banished from his town, which many veterans feel, that especially the ones we're working with, especially in prisons, jails, and whatnot, and homeless, if Caius Marcius can go to the enemy and say his name boldly, then that can inspire us. And then, as Dawn already said perfectly, then once we're that open, we can begin to assess, where is the trauma living in my body right now? How can I tap into that? How can I perhaps purge it or release it? Or take care of it, whatever is needed. So I've taken a lot of time, but perfectly done. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I also appreciate you naming Shakespeare being the great colonizer of all time, because I have been having my own series of conversations around the role of Shakespeare in theater and the pedestal that we have placed, the erasure that has caused. And I have read, many scholarly articles, and I understand it, and I've seen it used in practice as well. So I do understand, the use of Shakespeare, but I also see, have been conversations where we have to start calling out that Shakespeare is a tool. He is not the work, and he is erasing other ancient texts that have pre-existed him,
Yes.
So I just want to thank you for saying that.
Yeah, Praycious, I also just have to say, for us, decontextualize it. That's the whole point of two things.
And rewrite it.
There's two things. So we're not interested in what scholars in another country said that this means. We're interested in, what does this mean to the veteran that's standing in front of us? So we're not teaching how to be actors, although some come to us for that. What we're teaching is how to reconnect with your humanity and
providing the language that they may lack because of the thing.
Right. And
because of the trauma.
Yeah. But it's precisely because it is a foreign language that it works. However, the other thing is we've had veterans who took our work and said, well, yeah, that's great, that's lovely, but what really means something to me is the Bible. Psalms or so, and then they took it, and then we have BIPOC. It says, well, what really means something to me are the writings of James Baldwin, so and work with the writing. So it's all room. There's room in our program for their own personal writing and their own personal story. But we work with people who aren't used to having that out or telling that in any way. And they need a medium, but the medium can be anything. The point is, how is it connected to them? And they are telling us that, we're not telling them that.
Thank you for that. Suraya, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Praycious. And thank you for that point about Shakespeare. I've thought a lot about that too, and feels like it begs much wider discussion. And thank you, Dawn, Stephan, and Mama Nia. Great to listen to you all. And just as you were speaking, it reminds me of how theater invites us to get back to the body and the imagination. And like Mama Nia in that beautiful exercise, like that soulful way we give voice to who we are is so much deeper than like checking off boxes of like, I'm this age and this, race and this, to me. But yeah, I guess I'll add is me, one of the gifts of theater. And it's also something that's always in my mind when I'm facilitating a group. I work for Marin Shakespeare for 15 seasons and also on the outside, is that theater gives us this opportunity to be both distanced in the way we explore some important thing in our life, like self-care, or like what we value. And it also gives us the opportunity to get really, really personal. Now, I am really interested in getting personal, and sometimes the way into getting personal for me is to start with distance. Like we might be doing Macbeth, say, as our production at San Quentin or in some other prison, and it could be easier for some people to reflect on, wow, Macbeth's got this like impossible decision to make. How can this Macbeth person take care of themselves in this? What do you recommend? If you were their best friend, what would you recommend? We get at resources in this distance way, or we can get really personal. What's going on with you? How can you take care of yourself? So I'll just briefly share one of my favorite go-to exercises that kind of gets deep and doesn't have to get quiet, but for me it kind of invites a more reflective space, is something called the repeating question, which maybe you're familiar with. And it just involves in buddies, and we could do it right now as a group, but in buddies, one person asks some kind of important question. So for example, I might ask, what do you most value? Who or what do you most value? And I invite everyone now either to just, if it feels right, put a hand on your heart and your belly, or grab a pen and paper and just feel what comes up for you. Who or what do you most value? And then we take a pause to let our buddy speak or not speak. And then thank you, and then I'll ask the question again, who or what do you most value? And once again, I invite all of you to just feel into what arises. And one more time, who or what do you most value? So, and then I'll say thank you, and we'll do that maybe 3 minutes each and change roles. You can do that with lots of different questions, like what's the best way you can take care of yourself right now? Or what or who do you love? I'm a fan of asking resourcing questions, is what I call those kind of questions, like questions that get us connected to ourselves and our deepest value and our deepest resources. So yeah, so that's one of my favorite practices that's more personal as opposed to the distance practices where we get to reflect on a character.
Thank you. I appreciated that. I think Mama Nia wanted to jump back in and say a couple more things about where I'm from. I know we have a question though, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just really quickly wanted to say this because again, given the populations that we're working with, and I forgot to say this earlier, yeah, it is a good tool. It's a great exercise, but do not use it unless you're prepared for what's going to be said. And so again, as I spoke early when we first came on, I come from the privilege of a stable home and a stable family. My assumption when we do this exercise is not that people are going to be able to write about something like that. And so sometimes you run into working with people who don't feel like there's anything that they can say because it actually brings up a lot of pain. And so before doing an exercise, like, it does not mean that the exercise should not happen, but it means that you have to be prepared for that kind of space when the first thing that someone thinks about when they think about where they're from is being abused by a parent or being evicted multiple times, having to move all the time. So that when you're talking about a place, there are people who say, well, I'm not from any place. I don't have a place. We moved around my entire childhood. And so it is a beautiful tool, and it definitely gets you to, as I said earlier, to understanding who you are and what shapes your values. But as facilitators, you have to be prepared for what may come up and come out. And if you're not in a place where you feel like you can be prepared to hold that kind of space, it's an exercise to hold off until a later time.
I also appreciate you saying that, because I feel like that goes directly in line with my thoughts around how do we take care of ourselves when we begin to unearth the things in the groups that we're working with, and how do we take care of that group when they're unearthing. And so I appreciate you saying that. Melinda, would you like to come on now and ask your question?
Yes, hi. This is actually the perfect place for my question. So we worked out just perfectly as it does. In our first Q&A panel, we heard, it was about advocacy, and we heard from a returned citizen who also is a teaching artist now in the program that she is an alum from. And she said that she had concerns with how right now with the pandemic, a lot of programming has gone to, like a device or a packet that folks are receiving, and they're doing the work alone in their cells. And this person had a concern that who is there to hold space when the trauma comes up through the work, right? And we sort of touched on it, and then we moved on. And then the next Q&A was around programming in prisons during a pandemic, and we heard from, more folks about how they were getting their lessons into corrections. And some folks it was all paper, all analog, and then there were iPads going in, and then some folks, I think even some folks on this call we know are live streaming into prisons or uploading their lessons onto YouTube, and then folks inside are able to watch that way. And I guess my question for you all here today is, how do we, in this an unprecedented time where we are, live streaming our creative drama workshops in correctional facilities, and we're giving packets to folks in corrections to work through on their own, I wonder how we can set them up for a holistic experience with the work when we're apart. That's my question.
Suraya, would you like to?
Well, I can take, yeah, I'll respond. So Marin Shakespeare, I know Leslie Courier's on this Zoom meeting too, and she can probably have a lot more on this than I can. But yes, we have sent some educational materials into the prisons, an educational video on Romeo and Juliet, other curriculum material too. But in terms of how to actually make it a safer space, I want to defer to Leslie on that if you're open to hearing, because right now, because all of the California prisons are closed to programming, I'm on a hiatus of as all the teaching artists are, of actually going into the prison. So it's a great, great question, Melinda. And I guess one last thing I'll add is, you know, my prayer is, at least with the folks that we have worked with and that know us, that there's a, you know, a thread of holding that they hopefully feel. You know, I personally believe in the power of prayer. Not everybody does. I respect everybody's different beliefs, but I have been praying a lot for the people I work with. So, but yeah, I think it's a great question and a really difficult situation.
Is the question about how we're going to be physically safe when we go back into the prisons?
No, I think my question is more relating to the emotional and mental health of folks who may be actually really committed to the work and going through their packets alone and having experiencing you know, stuff that they might need some help with, and who is there to help them, and if no one is there to help them, how are we navigating that?
Well, one letter we got that answers a little bit of that from one of the men is that they're getting together, guys in the same housing unit are getting together and talking about the packet. And I don't know if they're doing that like during our regular class time or not. But it's very tense right now out here in California. I know there's people on this call who've been to San Quentin with us, and San Quentin now has over 1,000 cases of COVID in the last 2 weeks because of really poor decisions made by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to transfer men from a prison full of COVID to San Quentin, which had practically none, or actually it had none when these men arrived. So we're all having a really hard time of it. But I'll say one thing that's helping those men is that there's a lot of organizing going on from loved ones and family members. There was a rally Saturday. There was a rally the Saturday before that. There are online meetings and press conferences where some of the men are calling in. So they're feeling connected through those things, and just knowing that people are out here lobbying for them, I hope helps. But here are the doctors have said that we need to reduce the prison population by half in order for it to be possible to keep people safe inside. And so far, this EDCR is just business as usual. They released 3,500 of the 120,000 people. So there's still this false narrative that some incarcerated people are violent, and we all know that's ridiculous. The recidivism rate for lifers who've gotten out in the last 8 years is 0.8%, less than 1%. And a lot of those people were convicted of violent crimes, which is why they got a life sentence. But we all know that a lot of those people they are wiser and more together than I am by far. They've done so much work on themselves, and they are so ready to come out and not just stay out of trouble, but do something really positive for the world. So one of our graduates is named Adnan Khan, and he has an organization called Restore Justice that he started when he was inside San Quentin and has continued now that he's outside. And it's just an amazing lobbying organization. So I think those are some of the ways that the men inside are maintaining their mental health through a lot of crap. They are pretty much the most resilient people I've ever met. Resiliency is really big on the list of virtues and skills. So anything we can do to let them know we're thinking about them, I think means a whole lot.
Thank you, Leslie. I am going to just add my quick 2 cents, and then I'm going to actually defer to Stephan. Something that was taught to me by the great Kurt Tofflin, who's on this call, is that the circle always holds itself. And so my hope during this time for programs that have been launched and are ingrained in the community of the facility, that during these weird periods where they are potentially locked in their cells, with no recreation time, which I've experienced through running a program through this particular pandemic, is that those that have been doing that work are still finding ways to hold each other, together in their group. I know that wasn't said very eloquently, but I keep hearing that from practitioners that I talk to, that the group holds itself. And so hopefully during this time, they're still trying to do that as best as possible. But Stephan, would you like to?
Sure, yes, thank you. I think you said it brilliantly, Praycious, so thank you. And I agree with you that Kurt Tofflin is amazing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But not only the pandemic itself, which is a respiratory, it's among many other things, but one of the big things we know is attacking our respiratory system, which is the breath is the origin of, right? When we're born, for the most part, our body knows how to breathe, but then through social engineering and trauma, we affect the way we breathe. We modify it to survive. We're very creative, and we find creative ways to breathe in spite of all of this. And now we have a pandemic attacking it. So one of the first things we look at is trying to get, like Dawn said, the breath, find room for the breath, which is the origin of also making sound and vibration. So we went from being in a medicine circle in the room and perhaps even beating the drum to where we've had to have the vets do either inside out or outside in, humming to feel the vibration in their body, or tapping in, similar to EMDR, tapping the pressure points, observing their own breath by placing their hands on it. But then the other thing that this brought up is the privilege once again, because who's able to Skype or Zoom into our classes but people who have devices. So we've had to make another push to where we're very small organization, where we're out on Facebook going, hey, is anyone getting a new iPhone? Give us your old one for the trade-in. We'll give you a letter to try and get devices into the hands of veterans so that they have this at home as well, so that we can guide them through it if they don't have someone. And of course, if they're incarcerated, then we're not getting in there. But I agree with everyone else that fortunately, if we put in the work, they're able to do it themselves, because we have everything we need. But it's about having the permission to access what we have, and the breath, vibration, sound, and drumming are big keys that we found to getting in. Because the other thing is the microphone, even when we're on, the microphone only grabs 1/3 of our resonance. So we're losing a lot of that as well. So we have to really create a platform to wherever they are, they can make the sound. And final thing I'll say, but then that highlighted as well, just like Mama Nia said, there's several vets who have to leave their home because that's the place where some of the issues are happening, whether it's the trauma or a traumatic environment or what have you. So they have to leave their home, go out into the world with a mask, and now I'm trying to ask them to breathe in Central Park. So there's the problems. If anyone has the solutions, we're looking for anything you're coming up with, but what we're coming up with is a lot of tapping inside out or outside in while they're alone, and getting them devices to be able to check in
and
with us.
teaching them so they teach.
Teach to teach, yeah.
Teaching them.
I just want to say that all the techniques that you've shared, both on this Zoom and the last one, I appreciate very much, because again, so many people have not been taught to self-soothe, and just beginning to create that space for folks to understand that we actually do each have everything that we need in this space. It has to be one of the first things that we do with people, because moments like this happen, this pandemic where you can't get to someone, where you can't, be in a space with people that are going to help you to soothe through something. And for people to feel powerful enough in their own bodies that they already have everything. Humming is such an amazing tool. Oftentimes it's one of the first things that we remember. And so instead of having to remember the lyrics, like, what is that song? What is that church song? What is that song? Doesn't actually matter the song. It could be Jay-Z, like, Praycious, I know what your mama was singing. Like, what are you humming that is soothing? What can you hum that is soothing for you? And that also is a vibration. So there is proof that that vibration actually helps your body. It triggers the sympathetic, parasympathetic system. Yeah, it took me just a minute, but it triggers that parasympathetic nervous system that helps to soothe your body. And folks don't need to know all that language, just know that it works, and that we already have it in us. And so, you know, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I'm just gonna call out so that we hear the question that was asked in the chat and the response to it, and then I'm gonna go ahead and close for sake of time. There was a question, oh, I just lost it. No, there was a question that was asked, what self-care strategies do you all incorporate into your lives as practitioners beyond the participants in your program? Mom Nia responded with breathing, lots of fresh air, resting, unplugging, comedy, crying, talking to loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. So just to round this out, I want to thank you all for coming on this Q&A today. There will be and thank you to the panelists for participating. I really appreciate it having this conversation with you all, and I hope that I can see you again for the actual conference, which is coming up in October. Just to say that the network, the organizing committee will send a survey to the network surrounding all of the panel discussions that we led, just to get your feedback, to engage how you all felt about our facilitated programs. If you are not a member, please make sure that you sign up to be a member, or go, I think you just have to like the page on Facebook. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Melinda, to join the Public Shakespeare in Prisons Network on Facebook.
You just want to search for Shakespeare in Prisons Network group and then join the group.
Great. Yeah, and that the survey was just dropped in the chat by Melinda. So thank you all so much. And I believe that we are going to end the recording, but we will stay on a little bit past. Thank you guys.